I like Professor Ibatu's culture is more than money, because someone else spoke about culture is based on facts. And I think when you say culture is more than money, for me that's where it is. It's often look at culture in the way Western people look at culture, in the way the creative industries looks at culture, that you can measure it, you can weigh it, you can quantify it, and you can count it. But I think more than that, we need to see culture in terms of meaning, knowledge, and understanding. And in that way, we're going to build uniform identities. Uniform identities isn't about the things we count. My company is named IKS. It stands for Indigenous Knowledge Systems. And we need to respect indigenous knowledge and the systems that cultivate the identities and the multiple identities that we have. That was the first theme I saw coming out. The other one is a bit of me being a naughty person, as you know, Professor Ibawan. We often talk about these conventions, and I was part of fostering the arterial network and fostering coalitions for cultural diversity. But the other day I went to change money at the bank, and there were people with checks, signed pieces of paper. And sometimes these conventions appear to be nice big checks that we sign, but they're not cashed in. And they're not cashed in on behalf of the people that it should benefit, the organizations and the institutions. So for me, more than signing all these conventions is the implementation, the monitoring, and the evaluation of these conventions so that they have a context, a meaning within the context that we operate. The last point for me is thinking about diversity, peace, and unity. I was doing research many years ago in a place called KTC in Cape Town, and there was a lot of fights happening in the mid-80s in the apartheid years. And I met this old man, and I was trying to do in-depth research, and his main thing he said to me, ons moet by een pot sit en eet. And I was trying to understand, what do you mean? And he was really saying, we must all come together and eat out of one pot. And it means we need to together. We need to share. We need to share values. We need to share narratives. And in that way, we start to rebuild a Pan-African context. Not to build, but to rebuild one. And yeah, and I think that's where we should consider as leaders within the sector, how do we build a scenario where all ships rise together when the tide comes in? And I'm not sure how we do so.
Thank you very much. Again, I stand on all the points that have been shared by my fellow panelists. Thank you to Professor Ibrahima and Maiga. It was a wonderful class to listen to you. I consider myself, I'm a millennial, so for us, culture is a bit complicated. For me, I got involved in culture because of my father. He was a music collector, he was a traveler, so there was always that consumption of arts and culture at home. And that is how I grew my knowledge and my passion for the arts and culture, and found a way to also make some money out of it through my work. I initially wanted to be a musician, but at the time there were no proper platforms or avenues to ensure economic sustainability. So I majored off to work in the arts and culture sector as a writer at the beginning. What is my point? My point is here that someone did raise the issue of culture being used to grow the community, and also the need for a shift in mentality. There's been a lot of questions about inclusivity and diversity, and if I'm not wrong, based on the translation, that there's also the urgency of not really falling into the trap of promoting the agenda of international communities that are not aligned with our cultural practices as Africans. In this case, then, we need to accept the reality, like Andre mentioned. We are in a space where these things are happening, and we cannot have control of how our young people consume culture or how they get involved with culture. So that means we need to incorporate this education. If you cannot educate your children at home about the culture, then we need to incorporate culture arts education in our educational system. From where I come in Kenya, our second president was very much supportive of the arts and culture sector, and myself, I was one of the people that really benefited in arts education during his time when I was in primary school. But when he left office, things changed. As we speak now, Kenya has no national dress code. Kenya has no music identity. If you go to Kenya, you will hear music from the US, you will think there's an American artist in Kenya, you will think there's a Nigerian in Kenya, because we copy other cultures from other countries, Tanzania, Nigeria, South Africa. Musically, our music is not being archived. I believe someone did speak about how do we ensure the sustainability of the arts and culture sector. Now we have the digital space, so how do we archive our traditional knowledge? The white man came to Kenya and brought in Christianity and told us our traditional practices are witchcraft. And we grew up knowing that if you see someone dressed like that, that's a medicine man. That is the mentality that a lot of young people from where I come from take on, that if you are associated with culture, you should be embarrassed about it. You should not be proud about your cultural practices. When you're giving birth, you need to go back to the village to shave your kids. You need to get the blessings from the ancestors. This does not happen these days because of urbanization. Nobody wants to go back to the village. So we need to bring the village back to the city. And that's why institutions like the museum and other infrastructures that need to be developed in the urban centers to allow for young people who have lost touch with their cultural practices back at home to know their knowledge, to know their traditional practices. That is very important. Professor Ibrahima also talked about the digital space. Again, we cannot really ignore this. The world is moving ahead. We should not lose our identity, but at the same time, we need to be aligned with the global best practices. Andre did talk about the conventions. They're important. All these tools being brought up on a regional platform or international space are important. What we need to do is localize them. How does it fit into your own country? How does it fit into your own national development plans? So this is where the civil society, as David talked about, comes in. So we need to empower and ensure that we have young people who are cultural rights defenders. We have a lot of human rights defenders, but we need cultural rights defenders. This way, we have people who can be on such platforms and advocate for specific policies, for specific frameworks that would transform the culture sector, but at the same time maintaining its originality. For me, that is very important. For example, jazz in South Africa has really grown, but it's still in its original taste. But there's a lot of improvisation happening. So we are still at the global par with the rest of the world, but we still have an identity that when you play music, I don't need to wait for a minute to know which country it's coming from. It is a modern music, but it's got the taste of the South Africa authenticity. And that's what we need to encourage with the young people. As much as they do hip hop, I need to listen to some kora in that hip hop. I need to listen to you sing in your local language, because that is how we initiate young people. Young people love music, they love dance, they love theater. So we need to ensure that if you're shooting a movie, we have the traditional clothes. So they know this is normal, this is not witchcraft, because this is the mentality that the white man has brought to us and continues to invest a lot of money to ensure that we lose our culture on the continent. Finally, again, I'll go back to cultural policies, very important. Referencing yesterday's treaty, I think it's also very important that Professor 𝐍𝐢ger did ask the question, what next? Let's have something to report back in the next festival, that we took this theme throughout the year, we did 1, 2, 3 things, and this is what we have to report. So that means we need this implementation strategies, monitoring, how do we track the progress of the discussions that we're having here today with the wonderful ideas that we have received today. How do we implement them? How do we put them into action? So that next year we have something to report back on. Finally, the African Union, I believe in May, will be putting out the arts education policy. So this is something to also keep in mind to ensure that we include the arts and culture education in our lowest level of our young people, so that they grow knowing that we are Africans and they are proud to be Africans, and they make culture, be it music, dance, that is aligned with our arts and culture practices. In my opinion, I believe that's the only way, because we cannot control the world, but we can control our environment. So it starts from the family and it continues to become bigger from there. It's a good initiative that the president has decided to take on that mantle as a culture ambassador, and that's a good thing, because like I started at the beginning, our second president did take on that. And we did see the changes in the country during his term. He really invested in the arts and culture sector, built a lot of infrastructure for the artists, and even Sarah, the president's wife in Egypt, she also took on that advocacy at some point, and we saw the investment that came out of it in Egypt. They have museums, they have all this. So it's very important. Another important point that I would like to bring on is now, how do we bring in money into the arts and culture sector? Because we need money. The government may not have culture as a priority, but there's a lot of private sectors, PPIs that we could be able to initiate. The private sector can be able to put in some money through, bilateral agreements, and then we can be able to invest in institutions, in infrastructure, in foundations that are promoting our culture identity. I'll end it there. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.